It's long stems and
Big topics, big ideas, and practical policy solutions. This is Leaders on the Frontier with your host, David Leese.
Well, hi, everybody. It's David Leese here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier, and welcome to our audience for joining us again this week for our live discussion. We're going to talk about the U.S. election, I think, with an outstanding guest, and we'll get to that in a moment as we parse the U.S. election. What does it mean? What happened? And we're certainly eager to hear about your questions as we dare to look at this amazing barn burner of an election. It was a stunning election. And today is November 7th, so we have a little bit more data and information, and maybe you have had more time to think what really happened. And certainly November 7 is a very interesting day as we look ahead to, in the Canadian tradition and so many other countries, as we remember those who sacrificed their lives in the name of freedom. And this is, of course, why we wear in the Canadian tradition the poppy. And a question would be, do you wear a poppy still? I'm always interested as I travel in public places. It's always curious who wears a poppy. And is it important? I'm just curious, what do you think? There's a lot that has happened this past week, certainly in domestic politics in Canada. We've had a number of very important provincial elections. Certainly we know about Saskatchewan, where there was a majority returned back with the Saskatchewan Party in that incredible province. We also saw New Brunswick with the defeat of the Conservative Party and the incoming Liberal Party. And we also have in BC the continued counting of electoral ballots. It was a truly remarkable election, as you saw, almost a tie between the incumbent NDP government and the re-emerged BC Conservative Party. So it's a very interesting situation. So a warm welcome to everyone as we kind of look at our next topic here. And thank you so much for your comments from the audience. I see Colleen McFarland, who has good afternoon team. Thank you, Colleen. And of course, David Singer. Hi, David. I wear a poppy and always will to remember. And so it's very interesting as we think about the incredible history. And one of the questions I was asked by a friend of mine this past week was about some of the historical points where Canada played a significant role within different conflicts. And one of them was, the question was, how many Canadians served in the Korean War? It's often a war that is often not as well remembered. But the answer to that is altogether some 26,792 Canadians served in the Korean War. Of the 1,558 casualties, 516 were fatal. And the names of the fallen are inscribed in the Korean War Book of Remembrance on display at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa, which I had the pleasure of visiting this past year, and it was a very moving experience. And I certainly recommend people, if you are in Ottawa, our nation's capital, to be sure to look at that museum. In other news, I wanted to also mention that we have a lot going on. It's interesting, I noticed in the stats that capital spending on oil and gas are at the highest level in a decade. So as the oil patch continues to move forward. And on a relate, this is perhaps a bridge of interesting information in terms of economic news. We noticed that today the Federal Reserve in the United States, for a second consecutive time, cut the interest rate. You remember that in September, the Fed reduced the interest rate by some 50 basis points or half a percentage. And today it was another 0.25 percentage, or in other words, 25 basis points. So that trims the benchmark federal rate to the range of 4.5 to 4.75%. So stay tuned as the economy moves along in the United States as well. And obviously, that's our most important trading partner. And I believe we are just now lost our spot as the most important trading partner with the United States. And I think the most major one is Mexico, if memory serves me correctly. So the relationship with the United States is important. Obviously, we drink in, as Canadians, a lot of American culture, and so does the world. So I am very honored and privileged to welcome our guest, Jeffrey Tucker. And Jeffrey is the president of the Brownstone Institute. He's a friend. And Jeffrey, I think you are the most prolific columnist I've met in my life. Is that correct?
I don't know. I just have a day, a deadline every day or two. Actually, I meant to say every day and sometimes two. So
Yeah, it's amazing. I don't know how you do it, but you do it, and you have an incredible, brilliant team that you draw on. If you haven't checked out Brownstone, I encourage you to do that. What are your coordinates? Where can we find your analyses, Jeffrey?
brownstone.org. I have a new piece that went up about 10 minutes ago. And then I write every day for Epoch Times. So I have an archive there with several thousand articles.
So, if you want to get, I think a very grounded analysis, both in facts and evidence, and, I think kind of out of dare I say, a traditional kind of classical liberal position. Is there a way to describe that?
Sure. But I find myself just reporting on things that everybody should know. And I don't know, there's not enough of us out there reporting on them. So, yeah, that's what I do.
Exactly. So, Jeffrey, delighted you could join us, and delighted the audience is coming on board here. And we certainly welcome your questions to Jeffrey. So, November 5, and we've, of course, talked about this a number of times, was a stunning election victory. And if I can just highlight it quickly, on the presidency side, we had, of course, the system of the Electoral College, and maybe you can help us understand that better as Canadians, what that means exactly. But Donald Trump came in with 295 points within the Electoral College, and 270 are required to Harris's 226. And it appears that he won all the battleground states, all 7 of them. The Senate is a little bit in play, but it looks like it's 52 to 45 for the GOP, or the Grand Old Party. I think 3 are yet to be called, and it looks like it's a projected victory in the House for the GOP as well. So this is a stunning electoral victory. Was it a surprise to you, Jeffrey?
A little bit, but it wasn't a surprise to the Trump administration. I mean, they knew for sure it was coming, and they had been planning it for 4 years. We can march through the math of how it is that they knew that, and what they did to achieve it, which now, 48 hours after the election seems all inevitable, and I can describe that to you if you want to. But the big themes that are being talked about in the U.S., I think there's a consensus on all sides that this is a revolt of the people against the elites. Just as simple as that. And by the elites, I mean, the experts, government, media, social media influencers, Hollywood, big tech, big medicine, and so on. The whole machinery of the operation of society had become so top heavy, so that there were these sort of managers, highly ensconced in all the commanding heights of the social order. Probably what I'm describing sounds very familiar to you. That feels like Canada, right? Well, it feels like Germany, it feels like Spain, it feels like the UK, it feels like everywhere. But in the US, we do have a culture where people don't like that. But there's a sense that America is supposed to be democratic. And by that, we really mean that the people should be in charge of the government. And and that we do that through our elected representatives. And what happened over the last 4 years is we got some very severe presentations of how and why and the extent to which we are not in charge. The closure of businesses, the closure of churches, closure of schools, the intervention even in our houses, how many people we could have parties, where we could travel, what we could do, by seemingly arbitrary edict. And then to have the fallout be ill health, rising substance abuse, increased numbers of excess deaths, social cultural disorientation, and about 40% of decline in the purchasing power of the US dollar, all unfolded very dramatically, and that discredited the establishment in every way. So nobody believed anything anymore. Elon Musk took over Twitter, which is already a highly networked space, turned it into X. It became a platform for getting the word out. Then it was just a matter of two very critical things. One was to stop the ballot fraud, to stop fake votes from being counted. So very careful policing of all the polling stations, and then an inspiring campaign to get out the vote and get the disenfranchised re-enfranchised, namely male voters under the age of 40 who never vote. They've never had any reason to vote, basically, ever. And so that was the purpose of all the rallies around the country, 3 rallies a day for 6 months by a non-substance abusing candidate with a great facility for extemporaneous speaking, a master of sales and a tenacious desire to overcome all obstacles. And that magic combination led to what feels like the equivalent of a revolution within the form of a Western industrialized democracy. We've never seen that. I would say the closest thing the U.S. has ever seen was the election of 1800, where Thomas Jefferson came to power. But beyond that, we've never seen anything like this level of sweep. And like I say, the Trump campaign had every confidence that this was coming. It was just a matter of executing the plan well, and they did. And when I say the plan, I mean nothing other than making it possible for the people to speak, for their voices not to be drowned out, and to give them the inspiration to get out and speak. And the giant was toppled from his perch of power. Just over the course of a few hours, and that was the end.
So there you have it. That's a brilliant summation, Jeffrey Tucker. The giant was toppled. So in many measures, is this, without trying to sound, I don't mean this as an oversimplification. This is kind of like 1776 2.0, as the people rose up in a very interesting coalition and realignment of the electoral system against, you said, the powerful elite, the both powerful, the corrupt, the, many would say, incompetent. But is that another way to say it? Am I oversimplifying this?
No, I don't think it's oversimplified. I mean, that's the essential dynamic here. It's not really left and right. If you wanted to put another another sort of spin on it, you would say it was a kind of fulfillment of a class war. An overclass it became very fragile and thinner, ever thinner, and their edicts and their rule and their justification for their purchase of power became ever less credible in light of the COVID experience and everything that happened afterwards. So everything was set up, and it took too long, really. But in another sense, it was exactly on schedule. And Canadians need to understand this. Everybody in the world needs to understand this. What the underlying dynamic here is that we've had this sort of populist revolution brewing in this country since, I would say, Really since the end of the Cold War, because at the end of the Cold War, there was a sense that the country would become a normal country again. Embrace its core founding ideals, freedom. We'd be a peaceful commercial republic, and that sort of thing. And almost immediately, you could see that the elites that had been sort of risen up to their top of their power with the Cold War were disappointed that it came to an end, and kept looking for other justifications for fomenting war and pushing empire and that sort of thing. So, and the people kept pushing back, but we spent the last, I would say, 30 years with this tug of war between a kind of a revolutionary firmament from below, warring against the schemes of the elite planners in military and medicine and every area of life. But we've not yet to find the mechanism to make it real. And this kept getting more and more intense. Then after 9/11, they seized control of ever more, and the people got ever more upset. But each time something would happen, the populist movement would feel a sense of disempowerment and intimidation and go away. The other critical thing is that the party alignment in the ideological sense was always outside the tactile reality on the ground. So I'll just give you an example. As a major part of Trump's victory this time, we had a kind of revolt against the food system. Why are they poisoning us with these terrible products? How come big ag is ruling everything? Why are they force feeding me corn syrup instead of sugar? How come, famously, why are the Fruit Loops poisoned with red dye, whatever? So it's crazy red dye thing and so on. So, but this concern about the chemicals in our food and the power of pharmaceutical industry and the corruption of the food supply was always a crunchy left-wing liberal concern in the 1990s and following. So that it was a left-wing issue. If you were left-wing, you shopped at farmers markets. If you were right-wing, you gobbled chemicals and pesticides with abandon. The coming together of those two concerns in a single populist movement, one, a kind of a patriotic, real American Christian sensibility, give us our freedom, together with the food freedom and medical freedom movement, was pure magic, because it defied the old categories of left and right and Republicans and Democrats. We saw this kind of twisting of this alignment as part of this big business started going to the left in terms of its political alliances and abandoning the right. That left a huge hole to be filled on the right side, for lack of a better term, with working class Americans that have faced pressure from the machine that was taking away their jobs, eliminating American manufacturing. So it became a working class, I would say, sort of crunchy liberal movement, together with the resentment of pharma, together with patriots who are sick of the end of the war, sick of the forever wars, and all these things, and that necessarily created a majority. Now, this coalition had already started forming in a very powerful way under the, what it was lacking was a powerful leader, or I should say a compelling leader. That happened in 2016 when Donald Trump got the nomination, mostly because he seemed like an authentic candidate. If you look back at those days, he wiped out the Republican field. He had a lot of competition. They were all reading from a teleprompter and answering questions according to the rehearsed scripts, right? And he never prepared for any debates. Got up there and spoke extemporaneously. That was infectious. So he gets a nomination. Everybody treated him as a joke, but there was something compelling about him, and he swept to election, much to the shock of the entire establishment, which had sworn that Hillary Clinton was going to win based on the polls, which we've known now for a better part of 10 years not to trust the polls. But of course, lacking the ability of anything else to trust, we still trust the polls. But he won in 2016. Now, what unfolded during Trump's first term with a whole series of kind of plots against him? The claim that he was a Russian agent, or he made a treasonous phone call to Ukraine. He's done this bad thing. He made this bad comment, and so on. So, and then finally they got him with with the pandemic controls, right? So March 2020. Oh, look, here, the virus is here. Well, the virus had been here for the previous 6 months. There's no question about that. It apparently leaked sometime in September, October in Wuhan. But nonetheless, when March came, it was a sort of a deployment of the scheme to take out of the place of control the elected government and put in its place the permanent bureaucracy. And that truly did work. And as part of that were mail-in ballots, and which are universally considered unsecure and lead to uncredible elections. When Trump lost overnight, I mean, we all went to bed election year 2020 with the sense that he had easily won. We woke up the next morning and the election was declared for Biden. As the Trump people examined the votes, they noticed that there were an exaggerated number of voters that could otherwise not be accounted for. There were between 10 and 20 million new voters that appeared out of nowhere, all voting for Biden. And they reasoned from that pretty much the next day that the election had been stolen. Trump said this, and a lot of people believed it. Now, the elites like me, the fussy pundits and so on, looked at that and thought, well, this looks like just bad sport. This looks like a grade school kid who slid home and believes that he was safe, and the umpire called him out, right? And so we thought, well, this is not very sporting of you. But Trump didn't want to certify the election because to him it was very obvious. So for 4 years, so what happened then was that he insisted on this, and this always embarrassed, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the National Review. That's embarrassed even some people that are grudging supporters of his that he was saying things he shouldn't say. That surely were not true. This is a conspiracy theory and so on. But what's critical here, and we need to understand this, it's not the case that this is Trump being a sore loser, and it's not the case that he is inventing conspiracy theories, and it's not the case that this is just a public way to save face, as everybody assumed. What it in fact was the birth of a re-election strategy, okay? Because they strongly believed it, because they believed it was true. If there were 10 to 20 million votes that were completely made up, the way to get reelected is pretty simple. We need to have verified ballots, voter ID, careful policing of voting precincts, go back to paper ballots where possible, and on one hand, and also COVID was gone, right? So there's no more of this mail-in ballot nonsense. So that's point one. Point two would be to inspire the disenfranchised voters to get out and vote. I mean, just make them believe that that your vote matters. You need to get out there and vote early, get registered and vote early. So that was this constant message that ended up inspiring countless millions of especially men under the age of 40 for the first time to actually care about civic affairs. And the third point that they needed to do is take this magic man named Donald Trump, who has this astonishing star quality and this appeal, get him out doing rallies in every state. Make sure your base is shored up, and then go to the swing states. He did 2 and 3 rallies a day on most days for the better part of 6 months, speaking directly to the people over an extended period of time, together with patriotic music and laughs and jokes, and put together the community with community symbols, the hats, and so on, and basically win before the election, which is in fact what happened. So what happened on Tuesday was in many ways inevitable. According to the Trump people, they got rid of the systematic fraud and ballot harvesting and fake ballots. They inspired the disenfranchised to vote, and that was a multiracial coalition of voters, multiracial, mostly made of a middle class, lower middle class, and working class Americans were filled with resentment about what happened over the last 4 years, and then make sure that they and match all just they from their experience in 2020. So the Trump people were pleased, but they were not surprised. Everything fell into place exactly as they expected. Now, everything I just told you, my friend, has yet to be processed by the American press. It's probably the first time you've heard of what you just heard, but I promise you, in 6 months to a year, this will become very obvious to everybody.
Okay, so I mean, it's a fascinating distillation that you've done, Jeffrey, in terms of the remarkable story to this point in history on November 5, where we have these stunning results that it wasn't just simply an election, it was really marks an incredible revival within the power structures and democratic process within the United States. We've got a lot of comments from the audience here. I'm talking with the president of the Brownstone Institute, Jeffrey Tucker. I see a comment from, pardon my pronunciation, Zeldavine, who says, wow, he nails it. Many of us are even ex-left. That's very interesting.
That's true.
Isn't that an interesting comment, Jeffrey, that someone is saying, hey, I'm from the ex-left and I care about, if I'm understanding by that comment, about basic rights and freedoms, and I don't want a overbearing state or the good and the great running my life. Is that kind of like a reflection of kind of the point you're getting at?
So the Trump coalition, the powers that just got elected, are drawing from the left and the right. But keep in mind too that Donald Trump has remade, and the Trump forces have remade the right wing too.
Yes.
The Wall Street Journal right, made up of, ironically, a combination of, sort of forever war, the U.S. can't get involved in enough wars. We need to right every wrong in the world as we perceive it. And then together with free trade as a global consensus, So those two tenets. Oh, also with free immigration, right? So the old right wing, free trade, free immigration, and war forever, right? And that was, for lack of a better term, that was a kind of a globalist consensus. So those people are now gone from the Trump world. I wish we didn't call the Trump world right wing, because it doesn't actually make any sense. It's something else. And then from the left, you had the people who don't like censorship, and resent pharma. They didn't like the COVID controls, and they don't like the overlords from the administrative state telling everybody what to do. And also the anti-corporate left was very much drawn to Trump, because he spent as much time drawing attention to the problem of corporate power as he did government power. So, so what we have. So this is how serious this is. This is a shift in paradigm, in the sense the historian of science, Thomas Kuhn, described it in his 1962 book called Structure of Scientific Revolutions. It's an episodic, non-linear shift from one orthodoxy that collapsed under the weight of excessive anomalies, and we've entered into a pre-paradigmatic cobbling together of a new orthodoxy. That's how serious it is. It looks like just the change in an election. It's not. It's a change in the priorities of how we conceive of society and civilization itself.
Indeed, yeah. So, take note of Thomas Kuhn's reference to the nature of scientific revolutions. So the whole idea is that we all kind of have a way or worldview of thinking and basic assumptions around knowledge and how we understand the world. And it's like the paradigm of the past is broken down. So enough of the entrenched elites kind of running people's lives. It seems like Donald Trump really is kind of the people's voice here in some measure, who says enough of this. Let's take another course of direction. We're going to renew the U.S. society. We don't want to just be run by the so-called good and the great here. I've got a comment here from Lee Harding who says, "My poppy is on. Don Cherry approved." You remember Don Cherry, the famous commentary of the NHL? He always wore his poppy. So thank you for that comment. It's interesting you mentioned about electoral fraud, because it seems like the legacy media has really done a masterful job stifling that kind of debate. Usually, if someone makes those kinds of accusations, you say, well, bring it on, bring the evidence. Let's see this. Was it really electoral fraud in the background that also turned people off and said, this is like, I always remember of Hans Christian Andersen's wonderful children's tale called The Emperor Has No Clothes. Issue after issue where the legacy media asserted all kinds of narrative proved to be utterly false. The Russian collusion hoax, all kinds of things, the endless lawfare thrown at Donald Trump, the legacy media itself. I've seen analysis after analysis showing that overwhelmingly some 90% of the coverage was negative versus positive for the other side. So it was just utterly lopsided. Is that the bottom line here? Is that people figured out to a large degree that the emperor has no clothes here?
Something like that. It didn't help that Kamala played into this whole thing in ways that were unwitting. So she kept relying on influencers. I mean, like spending. She blew her campaign budget paying influencers like Beyonce to get up in Texas and say, "Oh,
Yes.
everybody should sort," or this Taylor Swift or something like that. And there are a whole series and she thought that because these people are popular in album sales or have large TikTok accounts or something like that, that she could rely on them. But what's strange about that is that there's something patronizing and condescending about that sort of electoral strategy. Here's someone you like, do what they say.
Like Taylor Swift? Like Taylor Swift, right?
Yeah. Yes. Do what they say. Well, the whole point of voting is to make your own decision. It's not a wise thing to put somebody else just because they're a good singer and say, oh, you should do the following thing. That sounds like an argument from a strange form of authority. So Kamala's whole election strategy played into exactly the messaging that Trump had, which is that there's a bunch of bad guys that are occupying unjust power at the top, and they're trying to run your lives.
I think that's a very good comment. Another audience comment here from Zelda Vine, praying that a super strong pro-freedom Republic administration next door can help Canada resist the slide into globalist totalitarianism.
Yeah.
So is this all going to rub off on the rest of us, including in Canada?
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, and for reasons I can't entirely explain, or maybe they are explainable, I don't have the explanation. What happens in the U.S. has had for nearly 250 years an outsized influence on the world. From the storied, revolutions to the advent of the U.S. Constitution, which is an unprecedented sort of experiment in government. Let's do away with the ermine robes and royalty. And by the way, I'm not an anti-royalist, just to be clear. I don't agree with Thomas Paine on this stuff. But I'm telling you, this is very much embedded in the American tradition. I mean, I think at an exaggerated anti-royalism.
You should move to Canada, Jeffrey.
Right. All right. Well, I have great respect for the monarchy as an institution. I mean, maybe not the current occupants of it, but anyway, as an institution. And I've had dinner with the King of Spain, the King of Brazil, and so on. So, and the King of Liechtenstein, for that matter, the pretender to the Habsburg throne. So I love all these guys. All right, but I'm just telling you, in the U.S. context, we have this funny idea that we don't need, a royal family, and that the people would. Yeah, it's really romantic and maybe it's stupid. And everybody laughed at us, but it worked. And throughout the 19th century, and by the end of the 19th century, it became very obvious to everybody on the planet that for implausible reasons, the U.S. We had bloody civil war and all that kind of stuff. but if slavery was gone, so that eliminated the last, really grim blemish on the American experiment. And then next thing you know, we're leading the world in every area, from plane, from steel production to plane travel, communications, and at the World's Fairs, which all the world attended, America was just rocking it with the hamburger and the Ferris wheel and you name it, right?
The hot dog.
The carousel, and so on, right? I mean, all this stuff is just great, and nation immigrants, because we got talented people from all over the world to do cool stuff for us, right? So the U.S. became kind of legendary after World War I. Whoa! Now the U.S. is carving up Europe to its liking, and that idiot Woodrow Wilson says, "Oh, well, down to Slovenia, up with whatever Yugoslavia or something," and it was terrible. But then the U.S. took credit, probably unjustly, for the victories in World War II, and so we emerged out of that, the world empire, battling, the bad guys in Russia. Then the Cold War ended, leaving a unitary power. But behind that entire story has been a kind of an idea that was embedded in the Declaration of Independence on one hand and the Bill of Rights on the other, which is this: that we don't have anything other than those two core things, and they're just ideas, and they have to do with human rights and liberties, right? And particularly free speech and so on, and those have somehow protected us, and those have occupied a storied place.
Indeed,
and the culture of the world, and that's why the things that happen in the United States, for good and bad, have an outsized influence over the entire world. So I can promise you this: there are populist movements, for lack of a better term. All right, you know what I mean when I say populist movements. I mean realigned working class pro-people style movements in every country in the world, from Brazil to Spain to Germany to UK and beyond. What happened yesterday in the United States is ironclad proof that it can succeed, and it can succeed in a credible way, that no one, in such a dramatic fashion that no one can deny it. There were no violent street protests. Mainstream media has got a frog in their throats, and not only because they're all hungover because of drinking themselves to death 2 nights ago, but also because they don't know what to say. It is a credible victory, and it was an across-the-board victory. That has pulled a switch the world over. It's going to affect Canada. It's going to affect all the Commonwealth countries and all of Europe. And I expect that this will spread to the Far East and all of Latin America. I think, and this is Thursday, the election was on Tuesday, that Tuesday election will resound all over the world and set an agenda and a new shape of the planet Earth for the next half century.
So there you have it. Jeffrey Tucker is foreshadowing the Revolution 2.0 from 1776. So to be a light on the hill and to shine that light right around the world, it's a very interesting statement around the profound nature of this election. So I'm talking with President of the Brownstone Institute, Jeffrey Tucker. I've got a lot of comments here. Was the election fraud made impossible because the IRL margin was too wide to fake? Was this too big to rig, Jeffrey?
So what? Well, I could just tell you from the Trump administration in exile looked very carefully at this and realized that the only way they made this happen was through mail-in balloting. So they figured if they could stop that and crack down with voter ID, insisting on in-person voting, and the critical thing, early voting, right? So the Republicans made their peace with early voting, and cracking down on absentee voting. And they did the math and decided that while they cannot eliminate all election fraud, all ballot fraud, that the only thing that made the margin of difference last time was the emergency rule under COVID. That was
Right.
not going to pertain this time. Now, the people on the other side knew that what was happening, and they knew. So here's the thing you need to understand. Everybody needs to understand. Even though in U.S. culture, everyone laughs at the claims of voter fraud, even though we can't talk about it, even though people put Trump down for always yammering on about that, and even though everyone says that this is ridiculous, I tell you that the people at the top of both those campaigns believed it very strongly. The Biden administration strongly believed that the only reason they were in power was due to the mucking around with the ballots in 2020. They knew that. So that was the purpose of the refugee floods that the U.S. got over the last 4 years. The purpose was not to turn these people into voters so much as it was to make plausible the demographics of the high votes they hope to manufacture
Right.
for Kamala. Now, it didn't work because there were so many people, the police in the system along the way. So this was it was a demographic tug of war on both sides, and everybody knew that that's what it was about. It was about the ballots and the legitimacy of the elections, and it just so happened that the Trump people had the people had a much better ground game.
Yeah. Okay. So this is, I think you're onto something in the sense that what I observed was extraordinary efforts by the GOP, the Trump campaign, to utilize all kinds of third-party players on part of their ground game and to really work the election integrity effort and to bring out the vote campaigns was on a massive scale. I don't even quite know. We'll see what comes out of the stats here as time goes on. The sheer number of hundreds of thousands of volunteers that really were in complete contrast with many of the proxies working on behalf of the Democrats, including organized labor and particular types of taxpayer-funded NGOs that were working on behalf of the Democrats, because they're all funded through the largesse of the state. Am I misreading this, or am I
That's
onto
right. But
something here?
it's here's the thing though. Another lesson that comes out of Tuesday is that passion, moral passion, and energy and
Indeed.
conviction is much more powerful than money alone.
The power of the citizen.
Yeah, the power of the citizen and the power of the sort of the passions of the heart can override large fortunes and huge machines. I mean, that's what we've seen, the triumph of the human spirit over the human pocketbook. Money can't buy everything.
Do you have a sense of what the spending ratio is? I haven't had time to do
I
the
know
math.
that Kamala's ends up being $20 million in debt at the end, despite having raised $1 billion. So they spent it all on influencers. But I don't know what happened. I mean, it's actually astonishing. I can't believe what just unfolded. I mean, we're going to see books written about this, the worst campaign in history, right? But I was at a pizza restaurant 2 nights ago, sitting there with some friends, and I don't have a TV at home, so I don't see ads, But there was an ad that came on for Kamala. This is like the day before the election, right? So I think that's right, the day before the election, and I watched one of her ads, and they had reduced it, like, oh, vote for Kamala for the following reasons, and they reduced it to 5 points, and the first point was, we'll stop gouging, grocery store gouging. Well, you know what's interesting about that point, just to stop there for a second, I could just tell you that no one in the United States believes that their local grocer is responsible for inflation.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the guy behind the meat counter is not ripping you off. I'm sorry. They have high prices too, and we are not total idiots. We know that the prices are higher at the stores because the stores themselves have to pay more for their products.
Right.
That is foolish and stupid, and the idea that you could pass a law from Washington saying prices don't go up. I mean, you really don't need to
Absolutely.
have a degree in economics to understand that
Yeah.
that will create massive shortages.
Right.
So, and the second one did the same thing on rents. And there is not a single person who pays rent in this country who doesn't know that if you force the companies who own your apartment building to charge you less for rent, you're going to get fewer services. When your air conditioner goes down, you're not going to have anybody to fix it. The hallway is not going to be vacuumed, and the water, will periodically be shut off. So we know this. The third point concerned, I don't know what. I mean, like, oh, they're going to give us $25,000 for a house. I'm sorry, but there isn't anybody who thinks that if I just had $25,000 in my pocket, I could afford a house. That's absurd. That is absurd. That achieves absolutely nothing. That's not even the closing costs. So you can't. And then the fourth point was something about, well, we're going to give you a tax break if you have kids. Well, what the hell? I mean, that's not going to do it. And I forget what the fifth point was, that they're not going to cut Social Security and Medicare. Well, Trump's not going to cut Social Security and Medicare either. So, and that was the ad. And then it went away. And I thought, that is the worst ad I've ever seen. Either I'm crazy or there's something wrong with this campaign.
Exactly. Well, but so Jeffrey, the policy platform, when it was finally unveiled with Harris, was kind of a joke, as you say, but it was overlaid with a strange set of vacuous rhetorical flourish. There's so many speeches that you listen to Kamala Harris, and I'm not sure what she was saying, but I do know that they began out of the Democratic convention in Chicago, emphasizing, what was it again? Oh yeah, joy. And then they have their final argument, which is, this guy, Donald Trump, is Adolf Hitler. I mean, haven't you lost the argument when you kind of go from joy to Adolf Hitler?
It's interesting that fascist Hitler stuff didn't stick, and I think part of the problem with that is that by the time they pulled that thing out, Trump already had a social movement in this country like there had never been before. I mean, there wasn't a single town he couldn't show up to the United States and get 10,000 people there. And other times he got 50,000, other times 80,000, other times, I mean, think about this. There wasn't a single venue anywhere in the United States that could fully hold one of his rallies.
Isn't it remarkable? Yeah.
So when they said he's a fascist, he's Hitler, what are they really saying about the people who would follow him? They're saying that they're fascists, that they're not,
or they're garbage. They're garbage, Jeffrey.
And that was explicitly said by Biden. So this becomes a problem when you systematically and unrelentingly insult more than half of America that way. And you expect to, I'm not sure what they expected to achieve with that, really.
It's
I don't know.
Probably not a wise election strategy or messaging, is it? There's a question here from Zeldivine again, that Harris, or she, refused to go on to Joe Rogan,
Yeah.
the podcaster, told everyone that she couldn't have an actual in real time convo without a teleprompter. Why did the DNC run her, Jeffrey?
There was, in some ways, she was the right person. She happened to be the person, and who happened to be in that position. There's no way they could get rid of. So here's the problem: the elites in the party thought that Biden was going to lose against Trump.
Right.
They didn't think he was up to doing it, and that he was going to lose. And after that debate, they'd long believed this, right? And after that debate, they decided that he was for sure going to lose. So at that point, you see, they don't have anything to lose. They're already lost. So they decided to make a pitch for something that they thought could possibly work, and they put everything into what now in contemporary American parlance is called the DEI thing. They could intimidate people into voting for her because she's a woman of color. Okay. And from their perspective, they've had such success with this identity politics. They thought it was a good gamble. Biden's a white male. So they think in these terms, right? They think in terms of and they've convinced themselves of it. Race and gender and ethnicity, drives your personal interests. And even though the traditional left thought all the time about class, working class versus capital, label capital, poor versus rich, the new left doesn't think that way at all. They've completely forgot about class analytics, and they only think about what they call intersectionality, including wildly exotic concerns over sexual identities and proclivities, and it gets increasingly bizarre. And they really came to believe in their own rhetoric. So if they could get a woman of color who talks about the importance of tax-funded sex change operations for refugees in prison, that would bring out the base, and so I know it's crazy, but they believed it. So she inherited that mantle. Now, I think the question concerns, why would you ever nominate somebody for a position like that who can't speak extemporaneously and doesn't have enough to say to be able to fill up, a Joe Rogan interview? I think that comes down to the fact that they have for a long time believed that democracy is just a game we play. It's that the candidates are really marionettes. That the system runs on its own. We don't really need these people. It's just that the people need these people. Yeah. So we don't actually need anybody to to do much more than read a teleprompter for a once-a-year talk at the State of the Union address, and otherwise the White House spokesman can take care of the rest, and the deep state runs the country, and it's nothing to worry about. So when Rogan asked her on, she proposed that Rogan come to her and that they limited the thing to 45 minutes and so on. Well, he didn't want to do that. But there's no way. It's fascinating. The other thing that's fascinating about her is it's not the case that she's, and everybody watched countless interviews with her, and we wondered why all the interviews were so strange. She seems so cagey and unwilling to answer the questions and giving the circuitous things and talking about how she was born in a middle class neighborhood where people love their lawns and all these strange things. We couldn't figure it out. The actual answer to this mystery is that she doesn't know anything. She hasn't watched the news in years. She's vice president and just was social butterfly. And a glib mouther of platitudes and spouter of bromides, for 4 years, and that's she had a good time of it, and worked for her, and but this sort of fakery just didn't work on the campaign trail, even though she had the media protecting her at every step.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Yeah. Even did her editing. It's really remarkable.
Yeah.
All of 60 Minutes. So we've got lots of questions here. So one of them is, I want to talk with you, Jeffrey, quickly about the big earthquake realignment here. There's so much background we could go into here, but we've got the realignment of blacks, from particularly black males to Donald Trump. You've got Hispanics that came out in droves for Donald Trump. Basically, the theme of the working class as well. The GOP now is really the party of the working class. It's not the Democrats.
Yeah.
And even Gen Z, 18 to 29-year-olds, where a whopping almost half voted for the GOP. 47%, if I'm correct. And then you've got this big shift now, even going on with these traditional blue states. You've got even places like Connecticut, your home state, the margin went down for the Democrats from 20 to 13%. What is going on here, Jeffrey?
Yeah, it's a complete realignment, and once people realize their class interests, that it's going to get more intense all the time. And yes, some of it has to do with Trump. There will never be another like him. That is absolutely for sure. But he represents something much bigger than himself, and I think people are seeing it. So we're seeing the toppling of this sort of very fragile elite. And once people realize that it's possible, it's only going to accelerate. It's like it's just like what happened at the end of the when the Soviet Union fell apart. It started off a little bit, but then it was all at once. So, once people see evidence that the trajectory of history is not fixed, then they rush to make it all happen.
Exactly. So related to that question then is what's really going on here in terms of income? You may have noticed as well, I think it was yesterday, Jeff Stein came out in the Washington Post, and I don't particularly like the Washington Post. I suspect you don't either. But there was a kind of a preliminary analysis on the election and a market shift of people who earn over $100,000 tend to vote Democrat versus less than 100,000 tend to shift it towards Trump. Is that part of the big shifts we're talking about? And college educated.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, with the inflation, that taxed everybody the same. Everybody was eaten alive by these things, and so now to be rich in America, you need, $170,000 a year. I mean, it's just utterly crazy. It's not rich. That's middle class. So
Exactly. Yes.
so that's changed a lot of things. But I don't know. I think really the story is that the veneer that's always covered the establishment in this country, that we care about the poor, we care about the youth, that's all been stripped away. I've just published an article just now on Brownstone website about plans that the CDC had to create nationwide quarantine camps in every public school in which they're going to put elderly populations and let them die. Okay, so this was a plan that was hatched July 23rd, 2020, unbeknownst to the elected government, as the permanent state did. It's kind of, well, if you're gonna basically have a central plan for death camps, that is not compassionate. That's not humanitarian. That flies in the face of
Utterly bizarre.
yeah. And so I think that the mask came off. Trump ripped it off in many ways, and so they called him a fascist. And we're looking at this thinking, yeah, but I don't know. You're the
Is
people.
that a bit of projection here, Jeffrey, when you call someone a fascist?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a psyop projection. Yeah, I'm afraid that's true. They're the ones who are the political prisoners. I regret to even mention this to you, but I scheduled an interview that starts in about 3 minutes, and I have to get
All
to
right.
it. I'm
Okay.
so sorry.
We are going to wrap things up in a hurry here, but I guess
Okay.
the question would be, we know that Donald Trump has said his top priorities are to close the open border, welcome legal immigration, not illegal immigration, and of course open up the energy spigots. What do you suspect is going to happen in the next administration?
Those are huge questions. I think you have an overt agenda. All those things you said will be done. There'll be the American version of Bastille Day. Yeah, I'm gonna have to turn that one down. Let me just mention that I'll be right there. Hold on.
But we can wrap up the
Yeah,
conversation
hold on.
with
Yeah,
you.
just there's going to be a Bastille Day with all political prisoners released and everything. I think the first budget is going to be extreme. We're going to eliminate at least 100 agencies, maybe as many as 200 agencies. The border will be, the refugees will be driven out, and I don't think we're going to have to do a lot of deportations. I think they're just going to be gone. A lot of deregulation, energy deregulation, and the Green New Deal will be repealed. All that's going to happen, very quickly within the first 30 days. So, but I'm very optimistic. I mean, most of the time, new governments come into power and they achieve absolutely nothing. But this time is different. I hope.
agree. I agree. So I'm going to say goodbye to Jeffrey Tucker. Thank you so much, my friend, for joining us. And I want to continue the conversation with our audience a little bit. It feels like in some ways this is such a profound election. In so many ways, it's obviously a fascinating case study for us as Canadians and has implications on us. So I do want to finish off the conversation a little bit with the audience's help here. And thank you so much for all your kind comments and great questions. It's interesting, like Lee Harding said, I'm glad for this straight talk on election shenanigans. Or David Singer says, same here, Lee, good summation of what's behind a seismic shift, which I hope influences our country in a good and needed way. And of course, we really appreciate your kind comments. So I'm really curious, what do you think about the U.S. election as well in terms of its impacts on Canada? I think I was talking with the Vice President of Research and Policy, Dr. Marco Navarro-Gini, about this question. And I think he made a very good point to me, and that was that perhaps we should see it as similar to last time when there was a Trump administration. There will be some great opportunities and challenges, but that Donald Trump is really a negotiator, a very practical dealer. And so I thought it was a great insight. So I'm curious, what do you think? Now, one of the questions here is, how might Trump's victory affect the outlook on the Ukraine war in Canada? His position against the war contrasts against all federal parties except for the People's Party of Canada. Well, I think the answer there is, I think he's stated this numerous times, I think actually dozens of times, that his intention would be to bring about a peace agreement with Ukraine, settle it, and get out of there. So I think that on the geopolitical side, a Trump administration, in my humble opinion, will have profound impacts on the war in Ukraine, as well as the situation in Israel. And of course, with Iran, you'll see a different, radically different change of course in terms of the relationship with Iran. The Obama administration really began, and Biden continued this, is kind of a form of appeasement and trying to work with Iran. And of course, that has been very problematic. So I think the Trump administration has very much signaled a change to the isolation of Iran unless they play ball in terms of working with the world community, including not funding terrorist organizations and proxies, including, what is it again? Oh yes, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. So there's, I think, going to be some significant changes on the world scene. I think in Canada's case, we have the opportunity to work with them. I think that one of the first projects that will be reactivated is likely the Keystone Project, which would be huge for our country's energy sector. So that brings to an end our conversation today. I just want to thank you for your kind encouragement and questions. Please like what we're doing, share it with people. There's a comment from Zeldivine again. Thank you both for the interview. Well, thank you for your participation. I think this has been a fascinating conversation. I think Jeffrey Tucker's onto something, that this was not any ordinary election. This is a kind of a change in the paradigm of how the United States is enabling people across the democratic tradition of an incredible republic that said we want to be empowered to run our lives the way we see fit. So that brings to an end our conversation. And here, I think you've got a great comment, David Singer. Thank you. Great show. Thank you, David and Frontier Center. So thank you again, everyone. And please to join us next Thursday. It's very interesting that we have an exciting event that we're going to hold online, and that is a virtual book launch. This one is with author and senior fellow at Frontier, Ray McGinnis, as we talk about his book called Unjustified, the illegal invocation of the Emergencies Measures Act. And that incredible story. Ray McGinnis is an extraordinary researcher, and I think you'll find that very interesting. So please join us next week. And in the meantime, I wish you and your family all the very best as we go about our week. And thank you very much for the opportunity to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.